Hey, what's up? I'm Andrew Bacon. So when we moved into our new house, it had an old, outdated rail system that just had to go. But we were a little bit nervous on wondering if we could actually pull off a cable rail system. Well, I'm excited to say that it worked and it's awesome. So I'm gonna show you how we demoed it, what we bought, and how my wife and I installed this awesome new cable rail system on this episode of Field Treasure Designs. So the first step is obviously demoing the outdated railing. I wanted to keep my 4x4 posts because they're strong, they're already built in, and all we have to do is paint them. The only trick was cutting off the top there, so I grabbed my multi-tool cutter and got to work trying to make a nice clean cut to knock them off. Because of the way these are built, all I had to do was cut around the perimeter and then twist off the top, then just a little cutting to smooth out the top. I'll be back later with my sander. Then I knocked out the other two. The next step was to take out the railings. I thought I could take off every individual baluster using a hex key, but I realized that they were installed pretty tight and it was just going to be easier to cut off the railings themselves. The trick here was not to damage the posts too much, so I started with my multi-tool cutter so I could get a nice clean cut along those edges. Then I grabbed my reciprocating saw for a little more power. I needed to be careful though to go straight down along that edge. After the first cut was complete, I was able to lift up real carefully and then remove the rest of those balusters. My awesome wife then came and helped me lift up the top so I could take the other balusters out. I then had the task of taking that top railing out of the wall. I realized that it was probably hung by 2 screws from the inside, so I went ahead and just yanked it out real carefully. And boom, all good. After I took the bottom part off, it was time to take the angled set down. So I did the exact same process. I started with my multi-tool, then I went to my reciprocating saw and followed the same steps. My wife was a great help in keeping it steady as I did that last cut. Because those balusters were mounted a lot stronger, I think due to the angle, we were able to pull it all off as one complete piece. After that, we worked our way around the staircase and then upstairs to the other railings, and since we had the process down, it was just a matter of working through the steps and knocking it all out, and doing our best to not damage the walls as best we could. If you notice there's blue tape on the wall, that's because I put that there in order to try to protect it while I was using that reciprocating saw blade. And sweet, we're done with demo. Awesome. Now here's where the fun begins. The installation of the cable railing. Now this is where everybody gets really intimidated. So I wanted to start first by having an equal distance of spacing in between each cable. I plan to have 8 cables equal distant. My top railing was going to be flat and it was going to start where the blue tape begins at the top there. And of course I'll patch the drywall later on. I also decided not to have a bottom railing and let the bottom be a cable itself. So this step was me working out the exact measurement in between each cable. Once I was done, I peeled the tape off and I was able to place it on a piece of 1/4" MDF that I had lying around that I was going to use as my template. I grabbed a piece of scrap 2x4s that I have laying around and I'm using those to measure my width for my template. I then ripped it down on my table saw. Next, I made a quick cut on my miter saw to get it to the perfect length. By the way, the reason for this template is so I have a standard measurement for each hole that I'm going to be drilling into the walls and the posts for the cable to run through. So here I'm getting out the drill bits that come with my cable railing package that I can drill right through this template that will allow me the perfect hole to then put into the wall and transfer into the posts as well. By the way, I'll have all the links to all the tools and cable railing system you need below in my show notes. Right here, I'm just making sure that my measurement is in the exact center of the board all the way down because you want to make sure this template is correct because if you get it right, you'll have no reason why you can't install your cable railing perfectly. Next, I grabbed a scrap piece of wood and I'm ready to drill my holes. The template is ready. Perfect. While I had been working on the cable template, my awesome wife had been priming the posts. So now I'm ready to start on the railing, which I want to get done before I do the cables. For our railing, I'm doing a nice modern Douglas fir. I picked this because it doesn't have as many knots. You can see here I'm cutting a knot out of it. And then it also has nice square edges as well. So I think it's going to look really good. To make my cuts, I simply measured each railing from the old style, and that gave me the exact measurement as well as angle for my new top railing. Then I just went back to my miter saw and made the cuts. Now here I'm cutting the other side. Then I repeated the same process for each cut. I measured on the old railing, I took that line over, I made the cuts, and I ended up with the exact same lengths of each railing fit. To attach my new railings to the posts and to the wall, I'm going to use pocket hole screws that are drilled in from underneath and then patched. So then I did the awesome process of what we all love, sanding. Now obviously this is a huge step because these are hand railings and you want to make sure that they are smooth and easy on the touch. Time for installation. So I've just installed that first railing and it's nice and snug, it's level, and now I'm moving on to the next one, and my awesome wife is there to help me hold it up while I install those pocket hole screws. I put one screw on each side so that I could twist it just a little with my level to make sure it's perfect before I screw in the other one, securing the railing. For the two angle railings, I realized that the underneath pocket hole screws were not going to hold it very tight. The good news is it allowed me enough support to be able to drive in the bottom ones and then come back and drive two 2.5-inch construction screws straight through the railing into the post. Now the good news is you can always just patch this later. I did start with making pilot holes though, which is really important so that you don't split your railing at the end there. I also plan to caulk around that little shadow you see there so that you don't even know there's a seam. Then we just did the same exact thing on the last two railings for the bottom staircase. Now it's template time. So you can see why I installed the railing so that that template would butt up against it at every single spot, guaranteeing the exact same measurement throughout. I started by taping the template, and then later I realized I didn't need to. I could just hold it there, make sure it was level, and then make my marks. After a brief dad interruption, I fixed their toy, and then I went back to work. All I had to do was take my Sharpie and make a dot through each template there so that I knew exactly where to drill my hole. Then I removed the template and carefully drilled my holes with that included drill bit into the wall, making sure I was tapping in to the studs behind that drywall. Thankfully, there were studs behind there, allowing the anchor to hold. If there hadn't been studs, I would have had to take the drywall away and added studs into it myself and then repatch the drywall. So I got pretty lucky on this one. Then I just worked my way around to each spot where holes needed to be drilled. By the way, we also primed and painted the railings just to get that step out of the way. Now this post is tricky because this one has to go through to the other side. And so you want to make sure you hit it on both sides. So I went ahead and made my marks on both sides in the middle just to be careful. And you'll see in a little while, I'm going to drill real carefully with a longer drill bit to try to match those up. It's not perfect, but it's just good enough to where we can patch it a little bit and make it look really good. Here I'm doing my best to make sure those holes did line up with my level. Another tricky part is the angle at the end there. As you can see, this is the bottom section, and those cables are going to need to be parallel to that handrail, which is an angle. And so I had to get a line. It's hard to show you on this video, but I made a line on the side of the post that I followed, and basically I just eyeballed my drill bit after I started it to go at an angle. It actually worked out really well. Fingers crossed, thankfully. Here I am doing the line on the other post for the other angle that goes up the stairs. This gives you a better idea of what I was doing. I drew a perfect line that was parallel to that top railing so that I could follow that line into the post when I drilled my holes. No pressure, right? Just need a steady hand that goes straight. Then I did the same thing on the other side. Just a few more holes to go, but then I realized that my drill bit was not long enough, so I had to order a longer one online and wait for it to come because I wanted to punch that hole all the way through to the other side because the cable is going to go continuous on this one stretch through that post, just like the one I showed you earlier. But in the meantime, I drilled on both sides so that when that longer drill bit comes, hopefully it'll meet near the middle and follow that hole out to the other side. So I got the longer drill bit, and here I am drilling real carefully from one side to the other. Thankfully, this worked out really well with minimal extra big holes on either side. If you look behind me, you can see a little sneak peek of the cable run that we've already done since this drill bit took a couple days to get here. Now it's finally time for the cable. So I ordered stainless steel cable. It's aircraft grade for deck railing on Amazon, and it's 1/8 inch. And so I'm gonna have the link below so you can get it as well. And you wanna start with measuring it out to the proper distance. For my first batch of measurements, I have the tape as one end, and then the end of that circle is the other end. So I mark it with a Sharpie, and I know right where to cut it, and then I can repeat that process. Here's a different angle for my next section that's a larger batch. And that distance is determined by what screws you're using to hold it in place. So my swage lag screws call for 1/2 inch shorter than the actual distance. And I'll explain why here in a second. So yeah, here I am pulling them out through that hole just to keep it controlled, get that measurement down, and then I can cut it in the right spot. So I did learn that it was a little bit tough to try to wrangle that cable and keep it straight. But with the right approach, using a tape or something to keep that distance secure, it works out great. When it got longer, I had to move it down to the floor. And done. Now this batch is complete. This is the hydraulic crimper that I ended up buying. There's a lot of options on Amazon, and I'm really glad I went with this one. Inside that cable crimper right there are 2 dies. Those press together with that hydraulic to press against those swage screws that the cable is going to go inside. The key is just finding the right size die to fit that cable crimper perfectly. As it gets closer, like I'm showing you in the video, it presses down, making sure that cable stays put inside the end of that screw. I'll show you that here in a second. This is the box of those swage lag screws I was talking about. So these are in left and right packs, which is really great. It comes with that drill bit that you saw earlier in the video, and the cable is going to go into the back of that screw, just like you see there. I then grab my hydraulic crimper. I like to tighten it a little bit of the ways just to get that out of the way so that I don't have to press much around it each time. And then I place the back inside, and just like you can imagine, that hydraulic presses down against the outside of that insert, pressing down on the metal, which then presses down on the cable, holding it in. Now, this was the biggest part of the project that I was the most concerned about. I didn't know if it would actually hold it in, but after it's all said and done, I never had one problem with the cable coming out after I had hydraulically clamped it down. At first, I even did 2 different sections on the back there for cramping, just for extra reinforcement, and I ended up only using one, and it held just fine. And there it is. There's the crimp. You can see it presses down, and it holds that cable super secure. So then I made sure I labeled my right and my left, just so that once they were put on, I knew which side was supposed to be which. So I got my first batch done on one side, and they all look great. And now I'm going to flip them over and do the other side, which is the other direction, and make sure that they all correspond the right way. And there we go. I've got this whole set done, and we're ready to do an installation. There are 2 wrenches that come with your swage screws, and my wife and I, when we get them installed, we are going to, on the left and the right, be twisting these the exact same way. So here I'm showing you the way that they're going to turn. This is a little confusing at first, but it starts to make sense once you install it. As you can see, we already had success with our first installation there on the right. So here we go. Now the beginning is really important. You have to press it in and get those threads caught so that they will both go in at the same rate. You don't want one going farther in than the other one, or else it's uneven. We also had to make sure we were turning at the exact same time and never over-rotating ahead of the other one. For a while, you don't feel like you're making any progress, and then all of a sudden, you see that cable start to get tight, and you know it's actually working. It was a little bit scary at first. I was like, man, if I cut these too short, and I've already crimped them, I have to start all over again. So don't get me wrong. It was a little bit stressful, but man, as you can see on the right there, it's definitely going to work out. You may have noticed that we're taking turns now. So my wife would turn once and then I would turn once because as we got closer to the end, we didn't want to overdo it. And there it goes. It starts to get nice and tight. We go one more at a time and then we are good. So we got that first one done and now we can just start the same process and work our way all the way down. As you can see, we are rolling now. So this is the section I was talking about earlier where you have to only crimp one side of the cables so that you can thread the non-crimped side through the hole. And then after they all get through, I go ahead and crimp them and they're ready to tighten in just like the other sections. And here I'm crimping all of them and then we'll be ready to install them. So we've already knocked out a couple rows and here I am just doing my side. We actually had to pass the wrench back and forth because the other one got stripped out pretty bad. It's still got a little slack, so here we are going one at a time until it's just right. We don't want to over tighten. Now we're at the last section. So just like I did above, I ran the cable through that 4x4 post and now we're getting all set up to do our runs. If you notice, we are really in sync. I don't know if we're counting together or if we had just done enough. And now as we get closer to the end on each run, we have to talk out loud and make sure we're telling each other so we don't overdo it on either side. The camera's kind of blurry, but here I'm trying to show you that tool, if you're not careful, it'll definitely strip out. And so I had to order a bunch of different boxes because I didn't count as well as I should have. But I'm so glad I did because I ended up having a couple more of these little wrenches that work perfectly with the swage screw. And so just remember that when you're ordering. And if you hadn't noticed, we're handing off that last wrench and sharing it because it's the last one that we can actually use. And so she's doing about 5 turns and then I'm doing about 5 turns for these last few runs. And boom, done. Look at that. Awesome. Just a couple minor details to show you. Sometimes the screws didn't go in straight, so I just took a mallet and I gently banged on it and it's all good. And so we also have one hole you'll see down there and other patches. We just went around and patched the drywall and the posts like we would normally, and all in all, it looks fantastic. Before I show you the finished product, here is the way it looked before, just dark and closed in. And after all the work, this is now what it looks like. We are so excited about this. It opens up the room, it gives it an awesome modern look. And man, it actually wasn't too bad when we went step by step. Hey, don't forget, I've got show notes below that have links to all the supplies you need to do your own cable railing. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, and we will see you again on the next video. See ya.